What's going on, everybody? This is the Rogue Ranger here with the power progression of Roronoa Zoro, the vice captain of the Straw Hat Pirates. As a child, he trained in swordsmanship at the Ishin Dojo in Shimosuke Village, becoming better than most of the adults. He, however, could never defeat Kuina, the daughter of the dojo's master. After losing 2001 duels to her, he revealed his dream of becoming the greatest swordsman in the world to her, a dream that she also shared. They then proceeded to make a promise to each other that either of them would become the best. However, tragedy struck with Kuina's sudden and tragic death, much to Zoro's anger and disappointment. Realizing that she would never have the chance to fulfill her dream, Zoro took it upon himself to fulfill it for the both of them and devoted his life to becoming the world's strongest swordsman. Asking for her signature sword, the Wado Ichimonji, one of the 21 great grade Meitos, he began working to develop his signature three-sword style, where he wields three swords simultaneously, holding one in each hand and the third in his jaw. Three-sword style typically uses all three blades to strike opponents, cutting them numerous times, or cutting multiple opponents at the same time. He is also able to effectively use all three of his swords to parry attacks and can even counter attacks performed by multiple opponents at once. This unconventional sword style utilizes Zoro's grueling amounts of rigorous training, developing both his superhuman arm and jaw strength as well as the immense ambidexterity required to effectively use all three swords and overwhelm opponents, exemplified by all the abnormal training exercises Zoro does since his childhood to current. This enables him to effectively deliver multiple slashes to his opponents from a variety of angles. Although his strength plays a large role in his techniques, as he frequently defeats his opponents by charging towards them, cutting them with a single attack, Zoro is also capable of performing extremely precise cuts, even blocking and cutting through small projectiles like bullets. It's these skills that allow him to have very little issue fighting against opponents wielding more swords than him. On a side note, Zoro, when getting serious in a battle, typically puts on his black bandana. Whether or not this has any real psychological effect on his ability is uncertain. Eventually, Zoro learned of Dracul Hawkeye Mihawk, the man who currently holds the title of the greatest swordsman in the world, setting off to sea searching for him in order to challenge him. However, he lost his way and could not find his way back home, so in order to survive on his own, he took on bounties to pay for his living expenses, building a reputation for his sword skill and as a pirate hunter. Running into trouble with the corrupt Marines in Shell's town, Zoro agreed to be tied to a pole for a month in exchange for amnesty. Unbeknownst to him, this was a lie. However, his fate would forever be changed by the arrival of one Monkey D. Luffy come to recruit him into his crew. Left with no choice, he became his first mate on Luffy's journey to become the king of the pirates. Proving himself a formidable combatant in battle on their adventures, however, it was a chance meeting with the man he set his sights on that opened his eyes that he was a little fish in a very big pond. Finally challenging Mihawk to a duel, he was outmatched and outclassed by the greatest swordsman using a pocket knife and even finding faults in his signature technique. Unceremoniously defeated but not broken with the will and resolve that would choose death rather than be second, which impressed Mihawk, Zoro increased his training efforts and pushed himself to be far more than what he was before, innovating his swordplay with new techniques and even generating strong whirlwind with attacks. Now for his feats. As a child, he was strong enough to overpower adults, block attacks from 8 Marines simultaneously, lift and carry a metal cage holding Luffy despite having just been stabbed through the gut, hold off and overpower hypnotized Buchi, who can shatter the ground with a leap, defeat multiple fishmen with just one sword. It should be noted that fishmen are typically 10 times stronger than the average human, and shatter all 6 of Hachi's swords before defeating the fishman with his dragon twister technique. Zoro's fast enough to block several rapid slashes from Shaman Buchi using only one sword, and dodge and counter all 6 of Hachi's swords simultaneously. In his first appearance, he was tied to a stake for 9 days with no food and jumps into action with no problem. He gets woken up by a cannonball blowing up the house he was sleeping in. He defeats Kabuji despite him targeting his prior stab wound. Taking Usopp's lead star to the shoulder opens him to taking a slash to the chest from Shaman Buchi, and he continues fighting. During his fight against Mihawk, he's stabbed in the chest and survives being slashed across his left shoulder all the way down to his right hip. Despite his injuries received from fighting Mihawk, putting him in a state of constant pain and on the brink of fainting, he's still able to fight and beat Hachi, even taking a headbutt directly to his wound. Keep in mind, Hachi is strong enough to push a massive reef, and while holding off Arlong, we get a good look at the scar Mihawk gave him that's barely being held together. During the Alabasta Saga, armed with 2 new swords, Yubashiri, a skillful Grey Meito, and the cursed Kitetsu III, with its bloodthirsty tendencies needing to be forcibly tamed by Zoro. Having been caught without enough swords on a couple occasions back in East Blue, Zoro began training to improve his 1 and 2 sword style techniques. Though being his original fighting style, Zoro's current 2-sword style is derivative of his main 3-sword style and has been mainly suited for when his 3-sword style is unavailable or taking on groups of weaker opponents. Figuring out the breadth of all things allowed Zoro to control his cutting power in tandem with developing high-speed sword draw and resheathing techniques to significantly increase his cutting proficiency. With his 1-sword style, which is mostly composed of specialized cutting and finishing techniques, Zoro was able to slice through Daz's bones' sturdy steel body. From then on, cutting through steel would become less challenging for the swordsman. Testing out his new swords, Zoro easily defeated the 100 bounty hunters at Whiskey Peak, clashed with Luffy, his own captain, matching him in strength, easily defeated Miss Valentine. During his battle with Mr. 1, though overpowered, he blocks the cut from his sparkling daisy that cuts the building behind him, and afterwards picks up and throws a building while bleeding profusely. Finally, upon learning to cut through steel, Zoro one-shots him. From the top of a building, Zoro moves into a crowd of bounty hunters before they could even notice him. Surrounded, he moves so fast again that he causes the bounty hunters to accidentally shoot each other. He has the precision to intercept and cut Mr. 5's nose fancy cannon, casually dodges Miss Valentine. Here, he blocks and counters Mr. 1's attacks, and knowing where to stand, Zoro dodges all this falling debris. Here, he overpowers Miss Monday after enduring a punch to his forehead that cracked the roof they were on, endures attacks from Luffy. Here, he was willing to cut his feet off to free himself from being turned into a wax statue, only to be stopped halfway once Luffy arrived to his rescue. He defeated Mr. 5 while on fire. He has no problem training shirtless in the icy snow environment of Drum Island, and in his fight against Mr. 1, Zoro took the assassin's spiral hollow to the chest and then was shredded with enough force the column behind him was sliced and collapsed. Through his experience, Zoro was able to recognize that Whiskey Peak was a den of bounty hunters. He goads Mr. 9 into jumping off a building. Upon learning of Mr. 2's abilities to copy people's appearance, he helps the crew plan out to make an X mark on their right arms to know their true identities, and he was able to recognize Mr. 1 use cutting attack just from the sound alone. In Skypiea, Zoro figured out how to perform flying slashes by swinging his sword with enough force and speed to create and launch a powerful air-compressed wind slash, significantly increasing the range of his attacks, allowing him to cut and damage objects at long distances. He very quickly integrated this into his own swordplay, launching it in a spiral manner. Forced to fight without his swords in the Davy Back fight, Zoro still proved himself formidable, creating his no-sword style, a fighting form derived from his 3-sword style that even recreates his Dragon Twister technique without cutting power. With this, he proves his sword is better than guns against Braham. Zoro's 3 swords flying slash cuts through Ohm's Iron Cloud, defeating him. Without using any sword, Zoro uses his Dragon Twister technique to send an opponent flying, and after being launched into the air by Sanji, Zoro grabs a giant by the mouth, lifts him airborne, and then dunks him into the goal ring. Here, he dodges gunfire despite being blinded by flashes of light. He can react to Ohm's Iron Cloud whip sword, and avoids fatal attacks even with Ohm predicting Zoro's movements. Zoro's tough enough to get right back up from falls hard enough to destroy stone ruins. He takes a direct hit to the chest from Ohm's Iron Cloud, and survives Eneru's lightning attacks of at least 30 million volts. He even endures multiple hits from the Groggy monsters. Having on multiple occasions to be noted to have a demonic aura / spirit that manifests when readying an attack, though we're unsure if it has to do with Haki, it has been noted to be a manifestation of his killing intent and power, the most extreme application of this being his 9-sword style Ashura. Through sheer will, Zoro manifests an apparition that duplicates his head, arms, and sword for a total of 9 blades being wielded, making him resemble the demonic god Ashura, seemingly tripling his attack power. On the way to Enies Lobby, Zoro generates half the force that punctures a hole through a massive tidal wave, cuts 2 train cars clean in 2, and easily breaks through T-Bone's attack before defeating him. On the Judicial Island, he uses a stronger variation of his onigiri to defeat multiple marines. He has no problem using another human being as a sword, and even launches a flying slash with them. He clashes with Kaku's giraffe form, producing a shockwave. After buffing himself up, he overpowered Kaku's and sent him flying. With his Dragon Twister, he's too much, forcing Kaku to dodge, and even broke through Kaku's 4-sword style Fury Slash Assault. And using his 9-sword style, Zoro cuts through Kaku's Sky Slicer, turning it into Mist, and then slashes him, defeating him. For reference, said attack could cut the Tower of Justice clean in two. Zoro easily cuts multiple cannonballs flying at him in two. He casually blocks and deflects bullets and cannonballs. He keeps up with Kaku's shave technique and blocks his flurry of Tempest kicks. Launching himself while spinning, Zoro's feint attack still lands even though Kaku dodged, and even cuts through multiple cannonballs thrown by Garp, which he outright states are flying faster than any ordinary cannonballs. In Water 7, Zoro survives being stabbed by Kaku and is then sent flying through a wall and across a city by Rob Lucci. In their rematch, Kaku's giraffe scythe sends him flying. Later, he endures getting rained on by a shower of Tempest kicks and a barrage from Kaku's giraffe attack. Afterwards, he's still ready to take on a force of 200 Marines. Zoro's skilled enough to recognize the CP9's Tempest kick as a flying slash the first time he saw it, and later, during his fight with Kaku, he was able to analyze how well his giraffe powers enhanced his 6 powers and 4-sword style. With the destruction of his sword Yubashiri, Zoro needed another sword that could handle his tremendous power. After defeating the zombie of the legendary samurai Ryuma, Zoro acquired his sword Susui to replace Yubashiri. Being a permanent black blade made Susui a remarkably more powerful sword, as it was designed to increase both the damage potential and the destructive power of the user, exemplified when it created a larger flying slash attack by absorbing the flying slashes of the 2 other swords. Zoro noted it was significantly heavier than Yubashiri and had a temper, making it difficult to wield. However, over time, Zoro began to master Susui's negative attributes. With just 2 swords, he clashes evenly with Ryuma, producing a powerful shockwave. Their battle even destroys the room they were in, causing it to cave in. He finishes off Ryuma with a 1-sword style slash that ignites on fire. During the battle with Oars, he cuts off one of the ancient giant's massive fangs. He uses his swords to wield a pair of nunchucks made out of stone columns and uses them to knock back Oars' massive arm. Here he deflects a punch from Oars. Here he creates this massive flying slash due to Susui. He cuts this tower into pieces for Sanji to use as ammunition. He slashes Oars with his 3000 Worlds technique. And on Sabaody, he uses 9-sword style to stagger a pacifista. Here, Zoro intercepts Ryuma. For context, Ryuma is empowered by Brook's shadow, giving him access to all of Brook's high-speed techniques. He even reacts to and blocks his attacks, continuing to keep up with Ryuma during their battle, even with the lack of good footing. He can react to Oars, who is empowered by Luffy's shadow, dodges Kuma's barrage of air-compressed shockwaves, and here Kuma couldn't even react to his Lion Song technique. In terrible condition, he dodges a laser from Kuma, and in Saobody, dodges point-blank gunfire. Here, Zoro endures a giant kick from Oars, continues to get back up from Oars' attack, causing the onlookers to compare him to a zombie, immediately gets back up from Kuma's Ursa shock, a massive shockwave that devastates the island-sized ship Thriller Bark to protect his captain. Then, in addition to all the previously mentioned injuries, Zoro takes it upon himself to take on all the pain and fatigue his captain Luffy endured during the events of Thriller Bark, which left him unconscious, and survives, commenting nothing happened, though this left him in a coma for 3 days afterwards. During the events of Sabaody arc, still recovering, Zoro endures fighting a pacifista and survives lasers from the Admiral Kizaru. Afterwards, while still injured, he managed to defeat a group of humandrils, surprising Mihawk. The humandrils are a type of mandrill that are highly intelligent, capable of imitating humans. After witnessing a war, they learned how to wield weapons and became bloodthirsty warriors. After being separated from his crew and stranded on Karagana Island, upon receiving his captain's message to regroup in 2 years instead of 3 days, Zoro swallowed his pride and requested the island's ruler, Draco Mihawk, the man he wanted to defeat, to train him during that time. Within those 2 years, under Mihawk's tutelage, Zoro refined his swordsmanship and increased his abilities exponentially. Now able to perform large-scale slashes with ease, no longer needed to use the back of the blade to control his own strength, and creating enhanced versions of his previous techniques, he's even shown no trouble utilizing other types of bladed weapons to complement or even fully execute his attacks. Zoro's also shown himself capable of replicating the sword styles of other swordsmen through observation alone. During those 2 years, he also learned Haki, a mysterious power that allows the user to utilize their own willpower for various purposes. With observation Haki, he's able to sense the presence, strength, and attacks of his opponent, greatly aiding in his ability to dodge and perceive attacks. And with his specialty armament Haki, he's able to form an invisible armor around himself and his swords to increase his defense and offense. This even allows him to strike Logia users' intangible bodies and enhance his flying slash attacks. He can also concentrate his Haki into his swords to blacken them, maximizing their cutting power for major attacks and avoid chipping them. During his reintroduction, he cuts a galleon ship clean in two. He easily cuts through a pacifista when 2 years prior it took the whole crew to defeat one. He slices a kraken's tentacles to pieces underwater. He defeats the fishman Hody Jones underwater where usually fishmen have the advantage. His new dragon twister cuts through thick steel as if it was fruit and continues on like an actual whirlwind, cutting up anyone who gets caught up in it. He easily stops Hyozu, breaking his swords, and later tells the strongest swordsman on Fishman Island that he can't even kill his boredom. As the Straw Hats enter the New World, Zoro cuts through the head of a Sea King that dwarfs the Thousand Sunny in size. On Punk Hazard, he matches strength with a dragon and later decapitates it, even though its extremely hard skin withstood a blow from Luffy. He easily cuts through Monet's Hardened Snow, which is shown to be very strong. He cuts through Monet's snow body with Haki just to show that he could, before cleaving her in two, generating a shockwave cutting along the floor and wall without Haki. The simple fear of knowing that Zoro could have killed her at that moment keeps her from reforming her body. In Dressrosa, he clashes blades with Admiral Fujitora. His improved flying slash technique cuts through Pika's stone golem, reaching his body. After being hurled through the air and hardening his swords with Haki, he cuts through Pika's utterly massive mountain-sized stone body. And when finally faced against Pika's real body, he cuts through his Haki defenses, defeating him. Later on, his Haki is strong enough to withstand Doflamingo's birdcage strings that can cut through meteors. Zoro effortlessly intercepts King Neptune's trident. He easily dodges Horty's shark arrows and outspeeds the fishman underwater. Here he easily stops Hyozu in his tracks, saving Robin, then later easily blocks every strike from his 8 blades. In Dressrosa, Zoro easily counters Pika's stone attacks and casually stops Pika's giant sword. Here, between falling into a freezing lake and being attacked by sharks, the freezing lake seems to bother Zoro more. While losing consciousness due to intoxicating gas, he stays awake long enough to cut through this rock formation. In Dressrosa, he launches a flying slash while being crushed underground by Fujitora's gravity powers. Being caught in the shockwave from Pika's massive stone fist sends him flying across the city, leaving him mostly unharmed. And he's fine after Pika's stone body punches him into a plateau hard enough to crack it. Here, when Pika fused with enough stone to form a colossal stone golem, the size increase allowed him to move closer to attack Zoro's allies. In response, he quickly came up with 5 potential strategies to stop him, and as he was on the move, he easily deduced the strategies and weakness of each approach until settling on the strategy that worked best. The strategy that was the best choice was to be launched through the sky to catch up to Pika and repeatedly cut his stone body, sensing which pieces he resided in until he was cornered and emerged. Zoro was also the one who came up with the plan to try and stop the birdcage long enough for Luffy to defeat Doflamingo. In Wano, Zoro was bestowed Enma, a great-grade Meito formerly wielded by the legendary samurai Kozuki Oden, under the promise that Susui is returned to Ryuma's grave. As one of the 2 swords that has scarred Kaido, a man renowned as the world's strongest creature, it's known for drawing out large amounts of the wielder's Haki, cutting more than intended and making it far more powerful but just as difficult to wield, as an average swordsman would be left a husk from the drain. However, he proved himself exceptional by forcing the Haki to flow back from the blade, seemingly subduing it. During the battle on the rooftop of Onigashima, Zoro revealed he had copied Kinemon's Foxfire style, a unique style of sword fighting that allows the user to generate, attack with, and even cut through fire after seeing it a couple times, and would later implement it into his 3-sword style. After striking Kaido with his 9-sword style, Zoro was noted to possessing Conqueror's Haki by the Emperor, a very rare form of Haki whose users are stated to have the qualities of a king. Later, during his battle with King the Wildfire, when Enma started draining the Haki from him, realizing the sword is still testing him, instead of fighting against it, he decided to give Enma his all, achieving the advanced application of Conqueror's Haki, infusing it into his 3 swords. Combining this and Foxfire style with his 3-sword style to dramatically increase the strength and range of his techniques, Zoro dubs this state King of Hell 3-sword style. In Wano, he was able to use a small blade only intended to be used for committing Senpoku to slice through part of a small building with Haki. He blocks an attack from Hawkins' giant straw monster, and with his 2 swords he slashes it apart. With just his 2 swords, he has no problem battling Killer, a fellow member of the Worst Generation. Using one of Killer's scythes as a substitute for his sword, he defeats him. Here he clashes with Wano Samurai Denjiro and easily overwhelms Ginku Maru in their rematch. Trying out Enma for the first time, Zoro accidentally cuts off an entire chunk of a coastal cliff while attempting to cut through a tree. Here he easily cuts the metal club of a numbered giant. During the battle on the rooftop of the Skull Dome, he cuts Prometheus in half, and later does the same with Kaido's Blast Breath. With Enma, Zoro is able to intimidate Kaido, a pirate emperor that tends to take attacks head-on to test his durability, into dodging and sliced off the Skull Dome's right horn. With his Dragon Twister, he was able to cut through Kaido's tough scales, damaging him, and combining Flame Rend with his 3-sword style, Zoro was able to cut Prometheus into pieces. In a last-ditch attack against Kaido, Zoro activated his 9-sword style Ashura and left a scar on the Emperor in his hybrid form, something only to ever be done once before. Temporarily recovering from his injury, Zoro lands his Purgatory Onigiri on King, a Lunarian, a race described as being able to survive in any natural environment. Here he blocks King's Imperial Archer with his Ultra Tiger Hunt, however he's still sent flying from the clash. Using his 2-sword style, he generates a shockwave strong enough to be used as propulsion to stop himself from falling. Developing King of Hell 3-sword style, Zoro is able to significantly damage King when the Lunarian easily recovered from Zoro's previous techniques. In response to Zoro's increase in power, King tries finishing him off with his Imperial Guardian Fire Dragon, which generates heat comparable to magma. However, Zoro counters, cutting through King's attack and simultaneously defeating him, clipping one of his wings. Zoro is shown to be able to block the nails fired at him by Hawkins' giant straw monster. He easily blocks this arrow aimed at Suru. He casually reacts to Gyukumaru's attacks, and he's fast enough to intercept Killer's attack, saving Hiyori. Here he evades Gyukumaru's attack from behind while dealing with Killer. During the raid on Onigashima, tired of chasing him down, Zoro quickly cuts down Scratchum Napu. Here he deflects one of Kaido's wind blades with ease. He was fast enough to grab a weakened Luffy, saving him from Big Mom. While holding on to Luffy, he was able to avoid Kaido's Dragon Twister Demolition Breath. Here he dodges Queen's laser beams and blocks King's sword from striking Sanji. When King was able to catch and pull away Zoro's sword with his own and attempted to go for a punch with his spiked glove, Zoro was still able to react, stopping King's punch with his 3rd sword. Later in the battle, Zoro has no trouble answering a transponder snout while fighting King. He narrowly avoids King's Imperial Deep Pride Stake, comparing it to a beam. While Enma is draining his Haki, Zoro is still able to block King's Imperial arrows, and here he dodges King's Imperial Fire Dragon. Despite the animals in Wano country having powerful toxins in their body due to the contaminated water, eating the poisonous fish only gave Zoro an upset stomach. When impaled due to Gyukumaru's interference, he tenses up his body to keep Killer from retrieving his scythe, and here he endures Scratchum Napu's sound-based attacks. During the battle of the rooftop of Onigashima, he easily recovers from being struck by lightning from Big Mom and Zeus. One of his best feats of durability is blocking the combined attack from 2 emperors long enough for his allies to get out of the way of its impact. Even after being heavily injured from the previous attack, Zoro still managed to continue fighting long enough to help separate Big Mom from Prometheus and land a final attack on Kaido, scarring him before he collapsed. While battling King, he recovers from being launched out of the Skull Dome. Later in the battle, his haki protects him from King's explosion, commenting he probably would have died without it. Here, Zoro is grazed by King's Imperial Deep Fried Steak that destroys a chunk of the area they're fighting on, and recovers from his flaming kick. During his battle against King, struggling to break through his insane durability, Zoro figures out and exploits a weakness of the Lunarian, that the flames on King's back determine his increase in durability or speed, which become a crucial factor in defeating him. Well, Zoro's come a long way, and honestly he's not that far from becoming the world's greatest swordsman. I'd say I'm not the only one looking forward to his rematch with Mihawk. Anything I miss, comment down below. Like, comment, subscribe. This has been the Rogue Ranger, powering down, and have a nice day.